Well, I'm super excited to be talking church today in Florida. This is people see the wood or they're listening. They're like, "Are you in the studio? It sounds good." I am here at Christ Fellowship Church and with one of my friends, Greg, and one of my new friends, Dave, and we're just thrilled to be chatting today. And this is one of America's largest churches. Didn't start that way, but you guys have grown to many campuses, tens of thousands of people attending on weekends, and you're both on the leadership team here. And so I wanted to just chat about a number of things that you guys are processing through in growth and challenges and opportunities and working with lead pastors that are traveling around the world, a lot of similar things. But maybe if you would just start and share what your role is on the team, how long you've been here, and then I've got some questions, and we'll just see where it goes.
Yeah. My name's Greg. Been on the team, gone on 19 years, which I feel like is ancient in church world. But I actually started as an intern, very first kind of church ministry experience. Just been on, just kind of done a little bit of everything. Spent a long time in student ministries, a long time kind of worship creative. Now look after a lot of our creative teams on our senior leadership team. Really look a lot of our digital teams in the last few years with COVID coming out. So whole new world for me. But 19 years. I'm kind of ancient.
You are ancient, man. 19 years.
Young ancient guy.
I've been on team for 15 years and started in...
Almost ancient.
Almost ancient. Not as old as Greg. Didn't start as an intern. Actually, AG Church for 2 different churches for 4 years each before coming to Christ Fellowship 15 years ago. Student ministries, and then helped open the doors to one of our campus locations, a video venue down in Boynton Beach, and spent about 3.5, 4 years there, and then came up here to broadcast, and I've been our broadcast campus pastor now for a number of years, and then most recently over the last year, been helping look after worship and production and programming, kind of the weekend experience of what we do, also while trying to help hold down broadcast campus as well. So it's fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
When I was here the first time, and I've been here a number of different times, and we've connected, and my parents are good friends with Todd and Julie. They love them, and I mean, everyone who knows Todd and Julie speaks so highly of them. But in a lot of ways, when I was here the first time, I think it was you who mentioned this to somebody. We're kind of like, hey, the biggest church you've never heard of.
Yeah.
And, of course, people know, and they're out in different circles. But I think most people are like, I didn't realize how big you guys are. That's huge to manage, and hundreds of staff, and again, all these locations, big buildings too, in a part of Florida that has a lot of people moving in, a lot of wealth, but there's also a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of people that struggle. And so there's I think there's just so many factors to ministry that we can't get into all of them today. But I think what would you say, okay, yeah, some people would say that, probably people in South Florida, they know you guys. Yeah. But what is it about Christ Fellowship that you would say is our, we sometimes use the term like secret sauce.
Yeah.
What is it on the team that's kept you for 19 years and 15 years working at a church, obviously seeing it through multiple different leaders, multiple different renditions of what the church looks like?
Yeah, I think I'll go first. I think, for us, we celebrated 40 years this year. So 1984 started in a living room, literally just a few blocks away, with our founding pastors. And I think a part of it is, honestly, their story. Part of my role this year, I got to kind of help bring that story to life of 40 years. But it's just a story of humbleness, of just never expecting God to do what he did. And I think, honestly, the secret sauce to that is they haven't, our senior pastors haven't lost that from day one. That, we talk a long time, on that timeline, there was, 7 years when they held at 70 and had no growth, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden God opened the doors from a, little school down the block to buying a piece of property right across the street, and then it just took off. And I think, even capturing that story this last year, the humbleness of, we just never expected God to do what he do. I think it's kind of what leads us to when I say biggest church never heard of, because our pastors, I told you before, they preach so they could pastor. There's just a humbleness of, you never think too much of yourself. You kind of just realize, man, God's got something bigger, and we're just kind of on the ride for it. So that, for me, I think that humbleness has been attractive, because I think staying as long on staff, 19 years is not normal anymore. But I think for us, I'm like, man, this is home for us. It's family for us. My wife and I have planted our marriage here, our family here. And I think a lot of that is, it's attractive to look at someone who's humble, leaders who are humble like Todd and Julie, and just go man, this is, you kind of feel like you just get to be part of family. I'm just building this alongside 2 generations that have built it. So that for me has been huge. The humbleness of it.
Yeah, their humility is just off the charts. And then I would say their integrity as well, just the way that they have lived their lives. There's there's favor on Christ Fellowship, but there's really favor on the Mullins family as well, from what Coach and Donna to Todd and Julie. And so that humility, that integrity, and Greg alluded to it, pastor often say there are some pastors who pastor so they can preach and others who preach so they can pastor. And he is a phenomenal preacher, but the goal is the pastoring. And when you have a senior pastor who's leading a church of, 14 campus locations and the tens of thousands that are here, who's at the altar nearly every weekend after every service, or in lobbies and in environments, he's an incredible pastor to the congregation, but then that overflows into the community. But more personally, it's the staff as well. I look at the way my family's been pastored, the way we've been cared for, the way we've been loved. And then you add the generosity that is on them as well, the generosity in which how they live their lives, how they do ministry, how they give to others. There's just something so favorable that is upon them. And I often tell people that a bad day at Christ Fellowship is better than most good days anywhere else. So I think that speaks to why I've been here for 15 years. Pretty special place.
In many ways, when I met Pastor Todd for the first time, he reminded me a lot of my dad, because they have that same awe and wonder about just, can you believe we get to do this? It never was, I'm too small, or this room is too small for me, or I'm too big for this room. There's just never any of that attitude, and I've always appreciated that about them. One of the things I think that people do struggle with, though, is even though that exists and that humility and integrity, sometimes as the church grows, you don't get that proximity as much anymore. I'm sure there have been times where with Coach and with Todd, you've had more, and now again on leadership team again, but how have you managed, and how do you see other people manage the tension to, I just love being around them, I love that integrity, but sometimes at a bigger church, or even churches that have a few staff members that it used to be just me and him, or it used to be just me and her, now it's actually, you can't have a lunch meeting every Tuesday, and you don't get to travel together as much. How have you guys managed that and seen your team manage some of those expectations?
I'll go first on this one. Just kind of speaking to the idea of layered leadership at Christ Fellowship. And so, our campus pastors, they are the extension and expression of our senior pastors Todd and Julie. And so I remember, pastoring a video venue, opening in Boynton, and my conversations in the lobby most of the time were, well, the pastor's not here in person. I want to be in the room where the pastor is. And I'm like, well, you're in a room with the pastor right now. My name's Pastor Dave. Love the opportunity to care for you. And sometimes at that time I would allude to, well, if you were at Palm Beach Gardens, you might be able to get to pastor, but there could be a line of people to meet him. But I'm here, and you're talking to me now. We're able to care for you. And so making sure that staff knows kind of who they are in representation of Pastors Todd and Julie, that they are, again, the extension of their hand, the expression of their heart and their voice. And so I think that's really helped. And early on, I remember coming to Christ Fellowship and interviewing with Pastor Julie, and like, it's like you found a new best friend, or like right away. It's just like, I think we're going to hang out. I think we're going to play cards every Friday night. And it's going to be great to be with Pastors Todd and Julie. And to be honest with you, they're extremely relational, and they are in other people's homes, and people are in their homes. But obviously they can't do that for everyone and for everyone who's coming in. But we say at Christ Fellowship, it's not just a cheesy slogan. It's true that church isn't a building you walk into, truly a family. But in order for that to be true, the staff has to embrace that. And because we've experienced from Todd and Julie that, and campus pastors are living that out, and kids directors and student pastors, it's kind of happening organically in that way. And the other thing is Todd and Julie, they do make themselves available to those requests that come in, or people that want to meet with them. And Todd especially has this uncanny ability to, like, 6 months, 8 months later, go, hey, Dave, remember Logan? Tell me, did you follow up with him? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that conversation was 8 months ago. But man, the guy, he so cares about people. It's contagious.
Yeah. And I mean, some of it I think goes to, again, like Dave said, layered leadership of, like, you model what you see. So, the way they treat us is the way I'm going, like, okay, like, how do I treat, especially the executive level, how do I treat the people I lead that way? How do I care about their families that way? How do I care about, like for me, my kids get the birthday cards every year. They get back to school things. So it's like, okay, how do I turn around and do that? But I do think the other stuff too, and we can go over and over the same thing. One thing we've maintained, even to this year, we have a pretty rhythmic staff meeting as far apart as our, some of our staff drive an hour. So we've limited how often it is. We were doing it every Wednesday. Okay. We've now we've dropped to, twice a month. But like twice a month, that's still, you're in a room of just staff and Pastor Todd and Julie. And there's the ability, like, oh man, 2 weeks ago he brought a message and staff. But it's a different look at, hey, this is kind of what I'm processing. And it's, well, you can't have a chat face to face, but you can with, face to face with your staff. So I do think, like, I look at a lot of churches who, they go to a certain size and like, hey, we could do that every quarter. But it's hard because we have people who, you live an hour. We're now, to get from north to south, it would take you 2 hours from our most 2.5 probably to campuses.
Well, the traffic that I hit coming here was pretty tough.
And it's South Florida, so if it's snowbird season, it's even worse.
Yeah.
But like, it's making that commitment to be like, it's still that important to be in the same room and to have vision. So I think as much as you could, I would say maximize, I think that's the big thing. As much as you can maximize those moments where your senior pastor can get in the room and go like, okay, like I can't do this for everyone, but I could do it in this moment and just, plan it and make sure it works. I think that adds a lot to it.
Yeah, just one more thing on this topic. I remember a time where Pastors Todd and Julie, in a moment of vulnerability, even shared with some of us on leadership team, like there are times that they feel like they're the ones always reaching out and that nobody reaches out to them because they assume that they're always busy. And one of the things, they shared with us is like, you could reach out to us too. Like we want to go out to dinner with you. We want to spend that time. And maybe there's a student pastor listening to this or connections pastor, whatever it is, don't wait for your senior pastor to reach out to you. Reach out to them. Say, hey, we'd love to have you over. And Pastor he's been in the home of our student director who Jonathan makes the best barbecue. I've never had it, but Pastor Todd and Julie have had it, I hear. So
he showed up at my Thanksgiving. He wasn't really invited. He'd tell you that. Yeah, I was just got a text. He's like, "Hey, what, are you guys still doing Thanksgiving?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "All right, we're coming." I'm like, "Okay." Yeah. I think it's just, it is that piece of sometimes just making the ask.
And it's kind of like the old adage of like the pretty girl at prom that doesn't get asked. And it's like,
exactly.
well, why'd you go with that dude? He's not even a good looking guy. Well, he's the only one who asked. And I wanted to go and wear the dress and everything. And I'm not saying that that's Todd and Julie, but hopefully more so Julie than Todd. But I think that I felt that in ministry, being a pastor's kid. Most holidays, like I don't get invited, to things. And I'm not saying this as woe is me, but it's more of a proving your point to. There's so many things that I think we just assume about people. Oh, I assume they're good. And again, in anybody in ministry, well, I didn't check in with them because I figured they were fine. How many people have quit churches because of that reason?
No one asked me.
No one asked me. Nobody checked in. Nobody. They didn't know about my needs because they never reached out. And I think that's one of the hardest things. Another thing that I think is so challenging though is as you grow larger, and I'm not trying to just focus on large for large sake. It's just that's the reality of where you guys are at. 40 years, again with all the campuses and people. How have you, or are there specific things you've done to keep the unity and culture? You were leading a broadcast or a satellite campus. Now you're leading the broadcast campus. There's differences when you have Todd in the room versus when he's on a screen. We have the same thing at our 11 sites. What are some of the things that you guys have learned that are maybe non-negotiables, super important to keep the unity, and maybe some others that you say, that's not as big of a deal that can have variation? There's a lot of people that are starting new campuses, becoming multi-site, coming out of COVID because of drive times and all sorts of reasons. What would be some of the things that you guys have focused on? I
mean, I do think some of it, as much as we say we're a large church, but we're made up of a lot of smaller campuses. Like you look at some of our campuses, they are small churches. You know what I mean? And I think, and for us, and I think for us, that's actually a good chunk of our growth. More and more has been at those our big camp. I shouldn't say all. Some of our big campuses are growing. Not all of our big campuses, but are the place that is going to be the future of our growth. It is in these smaller neighborhoods, and I think that's where it's like, how do you? I think as I think we're finding, like the importance of your campus pastor being someone who is a relational, because your senior pastors aren't here in the room, like how do I leverage really being a relational leader? Like I think about one of our guys at Jupiter campus. I mean, you're 15 minutes up the block, but I mean, they're crushing. They're about to build a new building. So you're 15 minutes away from a project. So most of it, I'm just going to go there. But actually the smallness of that becomes so attractive that it's like, hey, I kind of get the best of both worlds. Like I get my senior pastors, I'm hearing from every weekend. I think screens, that's becoming a thing of the past to me of like, you watch a screen all day long and learn from it. So it's, it's not too different anymore. But the relational piece of the campus of going like, I'm not just a host. Whoever gets on the platform, the pastor, like I'm not hosting a service. I'm literally pastoring.
Yeah, I know you.
I'm
I know
pastoring
your
a community. So I think that piece, the more campus pastors I see go like, I'm pastoring this community, meaning like I'm in their homes, I'm in their hospitals, I'm in the schools, I'm in, you know what I mean? That's where you just, all of a sudden you're like, I don't even feel like I'm missing out. I feel like I'm actually just part of Christ Fellowship in a different way. So I do think, as much as there's the bigness, you have a lot of smalls make up the big. So I mean, you have most of our campuses that really operate that way, and I think so much of it is who you pick to lead it.
Yeah, and that obviously overflows into the dream team or volunteers that you have working. And so a larger video venue or satellite location, campus pastor can't get to every hospital visit. But if the dream team coach of your 8:30 service is able to get to the hospital visit or whatever that moment might be, the care that works through its layered leadership with your teams, that's going to help so much a large church feel small. The other thing is, you mentioned culture a little bit. You've heard it before, but you have culture by definition or by default, and you can't have culture by default. It's got to be defined. It's got to be designed, and there is such a culture that we try to protect here at Christ Fellowship. And so we're looking at every campus pastor to make sure that culture of being family, of living out these values that we talk about, it's preached to their team, it's lived before their volunteers, and that people see it on the weekend. I mean, if you're in ministry and the first thing you're looking to do when church is over is get out of the building, I don't think ministry's it. Right. I don't think that's the calling. You're usually first in, last out. That's what you want to do so that you can be caring for people. And again, not while you're caring for people, you're also emulating the culture that you want in the organization.
Yeah, I think some of it too, even our new staff hire, like we're still really, Pastor Julie especially, very hands-on. Like when people are, just our process to get on staff, it's pretty long. But even once you're on, like our new hire experience, day one, if it's not Pastor Julie, it's one of our senior leaders are in your room day one with who's ever coming on. That Monday morning, if it's 2 people or 5 people or 10 people, someone's in the room. And actually just dropping culture day one of like, this is the team you're joining. This is the home, and then on top of that, we do almost a full day experience a few times a year with new staff. We'll do one, I think this week or next week, that our whole leadership team spends the day coming in lunches and Q&As and just sharing our hearts on, hey, the access to it. But most of that day is focused fully on culture of like, this is who we are. This is what we want you to grasp. I think it's so important doing that so early on, because you may get through the process of even coming on and be like, I kind of got it. But then having that direct investment quickly of like, this is how important it is that whatever we're doing, we're stopping the day to spend time here. Your first day to be like, this is what God's got for you, but this is a commitment you're going to make to us and to unity here.
And I think sometimes that people who are a part of smaller teams sometimes miss that opportunity. And I just would encourage them to not do that, because I think the assumption is, well, when you have a bigger team, you got to be more intentional about it, because we have so many times when we're, together as a small team. But you're doing church, event, weekend. And I do think that pastors of smaller teams need to be just as intentional about someone that's new on the team, or maybe even more so, because if you don't have that good relationship right away, that's going to cause way more friction than, okay, I love the vision, but I'm not in meetings with you. I'm not arguing about what design we should use. And so I think that, again, I don't want people to think, oh, well, that's just a big church thing. No, that's an every church thing. I'm firing away here because I want to, again, I know there's probably a lot of people that have questions, and I selfishly just do. But last time I was here a while back, you talked about some of the campus launch strategy. And if I remember correctly, it was a pretty long on-ramp, to launch a campus. Is that still the case, or have you pivoted since COVID? Or maybe just talk through, like, when you're thinking about a new community that you want to go be a part of, is it, hey, as soon as possible? Or is it or is there more research that goes into it? And again, I know it's probably different every time.
Certainly.
But is there anything you've seen that's been like, okay, this was something we did? Like, I'll just share maybe an example from mine. I think we launched a couple campuses at one time that was maybe a little bit too quick. Now we're working it out; it's going great. But it was we could have done a longer on-ramp because we started, our venue fell through. There's reasons to that I won't get into, but our venue falls through, then we had to go to another venue. And like, maybe if we would have given ourselves more time, we could have set ourselves up better. Whereas other campuses, you launch and you say, well, the shortness adds some momentum to it. And it's kind of cool. Have you guys found one to be true or the other? Or are there any, like, you got to do this, or there's no real rhyme or reason?
Yeah, I'd say it has changed drastically from where we were. And we're not, I think like other churches our size, we're not launching at the speed. Coming out of COVID, we're not launching campuses at the speed we were. Now, some of that's intentional. Some of that's also, I think, costs are huge. I also think digital's grown, so you're pastoring people a different way. I will say, like, I think one of our things I will say, we launched a campus during COVID. We launched a Boca Raton campus. So I'm gonna blank now. We're probably 3 years into it fully.
Yeah, about 3.
From like a campus. And now we're about to build massive building. We have a Macy's we're moving into. But honestly, that was very different because we kind of
former Macy's or a current Macy's?
Well, now it's a former Macy's.
Okay.
Furniture
Just
store.
moved the
Macy's
furniture
They just
store
moved
out.
the furniture out.
Yeah.
But I think it really started like pre-COVID. We actually had this idea of, hey, the investment to launch campus is so expensive. So like actually a few years before COVID, we had this idea of like pop-up church of like, hey, what if instead of committing all this resource into a brand new building, what if we said, hey, we're gonna actually pick 2 campuses we were at the furthest south and the furthest north. We're like, what if we say, hey, one Sunday night a month? So we had Vero Beach and we had Boca Raton. It's like, hey, what if we one Sunday night a month we're gonna come join you there and we're gonna bring church with us. So we're only renting a venue one Sunday, and it wasn't crushing us. But it's like, hey, what if we just go like we have this monthly Sunday night experience and then we just build groups out of that, and then we do the same thing in this other one. So now you have one team that's kind of able to handle 2 places. It was very different approach. It was honestly came out of some time at Chick-fil-A and Google going like, can we just do something different? Like companies do something different. What if we do something different? Because a lot of times you're launching a campus, it's like, oh my gosh, we got to have a building. We have 50 Sundays. We got a budget. We got to have staff. And it was like, well, we can kind of do this,
right.
And it was funny because both of them are launched healthy now. But like Boca was one that honestly, you did like 1 or 2 and you're like, less people show up every time. And we're just kind of like, we started here, now we're here.
Yeah.
And it's like, and some of the people are like, hey, we're just not willing to commit. But I'll tell you, there's one guy on the ground who just said, hey, like I see potential. And he was from the campus that was closest nearby. And he just started building relationships. Like him and his wife just kept doing small groups, kept doing small groups. He'd be doing a night of worship. Like, wait, why are we doing a night of worship? He's like, it's fine. I did it with an acoustic guitar. We're good. But like, honestly, where our northern campus, it kind of found its legs pretty quick. We were able to launch during COVID, similar to what another building, but we launched with like a brand new building and you had a group of 300-400 coming every Sunday, every other Sunday, one Sunday a month. They just were able to launch strong. This group, COVID kind of hit us, same thing. Buildings fell through, all this stuff. But he just kept building relationships. Well, we came out of COVID and launched a campus. And I mean, we call it like this. We bought a campus we've never built a campus. We've never opened a building. Yeah. We bought an old Methodist church that kind of fell in our lap.
That's part of it. It's an opportunity.
It was an opportunity. It was like, hey, this building's here. It's like, that's not what we do. There's not enough parking. It's too old. And we're like, you know what? Let's just do it. Like we have all these people, we have to do something. So we call it the cabin in the woods because it's all wood, but we bought it. First Sunday out of the gate, I mean, he blew up. I mean, we're now running, I think 4 services because you can't fit more than, it's a small room. But I think it just owed to like, there is this strategy of like, hey, you launch big, you kind of take the heat map and you're like, where's everyone coming from? This started like that, but I think it carried with just how do I just keep sewing in? How do I just keep sewing in? We never had to look for a campus pastor because it was like Robbie's got to do it. He's been leading small groups since day one. He just worked into himself of like, he's naturally leading. So I think for me, so much of it is like, you could lead with strategy, but so much is going to be where you land and where, who's in the ground and what does it. So I do think, I will say, I think we're confident of the days of just running a play to launch campus is probably over. It's much more strategic of like, where is there people, but also what's available and what's the ability to do.
And it's opportunistic as well. I mean, when the Trinity Church came available to us right around the corner from here, 1.5 miles from Broadcast. Yeah, we have a video venue campus, but there was an opportunity that came. There was a pocket of people that reached to, and so we've got church happening there, just 1.5 miles from here. And when that Methodist church came available in Boca, and so I think post-COVID, churches have to be nimble, and when the opportunities come, I think that the thing that we often don't think about is, because everybody's thinking about the money and the building and even the people, but I would be encouraging teams, no matter the size or if you're ready for multi-site or not, is to be thinking about leadership development and who are the staff in the pipeline to go, because you could get some opportunities that drop in your lap, but if you don't have the leadership pipeline and the leadership development, the people that are ready to go, then you have all this opportunity and no real resource. And I'm not talking about just financial, where a lot of people spend that time with that. And so I think there's strategy, there's opportunity, and then there's sovereignty, and just the will of God.
Yeah, and it's not to say like we have a campus right now. We have a brand new city out west that's about 3 years old, tens of thousands of people, and we were the first ones to buy dirt that was like, okay, we want to be the church in the middle of it, and it's booming, it's awesome. So I mean, there's still the piece of like, hey, Florida has a
strategic.
weird opportunity of
Yeah.
you have thousands of people moving every day. So I mean,
Yeah, all the
last few
people from our
years-
church.
Yeah. So last year, and they're great. They're nice Christians moving.
yeah.
No.
Welcome
So
to
I mean,
South
it's just
Florida.
going like, how do you, we have had this huge influx, but it's like, how do you just create it? But then we also have a group of like 35 people in Orlando. Every Sunday they watch church online, but like their church, like they meet in the same house, the same people, they've done baptisms. So I think it's like, that wouldn't have been a thing for us 5 years ago. It would have been like, oh, that's not real. You know what I mean? And now we're like, I mean, we have kingdom builders who live there. Like there are people who sacrifice and build our church. So I think it's just, I think we got to be more hands open. And that honestly, it came from a conversation of a church we talked to in Atlanta who was like, we kept trying to find a building. And we're so focused on like, well, a building has to be somewhere we've rent. We have it 52 Sundays and it just wasn't working. And finally it was like, well, we have this opportunity for 36 Sundays. And it was like, who are we to say like, no, let's just have church 36 Sundays and let's see what happens. And for them, they were like, we saw a huge success. So it kind of gave us to go to be like, okay, maybe we don't have to think about it with it has to check every box we thought it had to check.
Right.
And I will say our campuses are so diverse. We got churches in malls, like full out malls. Then we have like strip malls. Then we have single. Then we have Old Methodist Church. It is very, we don't have
counties.
We don't have a cookie cutter. Like we keep hoping like we'll be able to go like, oh, here's our building. We know how to build it. But somehow we keep getting stuck in situations where we're like, okay, let's just take that one and we'll figure it out. So that's great.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I sense that a lot of churches find themselves in that spot, which is opportunity.
Yeah.
What comes, what the Lord brings our way, praying about it. Is it the right fit? Most churches, especially the first time they go multi-site, is usually that. Like they've been wondering, when do I do it? When do I do it?
Sure.
That was for us. The church just kind of fell into our lap. Hey, there's a church that has 40 people. Would you take this over?
And I think what Dave said is huge in that to leadership, because we have missed in our history of a church, we have had to say no to multiple opportunities. That it's like, here's a building, it's ready to go, and we're like, we can't. Like we don't. We could support it financially. Yeah, we probably have people who would go, but like we don't have anyone to lead it.
Right.
And I think for us, it was aha of like, man, we never want to be in a place where we get literally God goes like, hey, here's a gift, and we're like, well, sorry, give it somebody else. You know what I mean? So I think it's continually putting yourself in like, who's the one coming up, who's ready to take it. You know what I mean?
And I think for every church leader out there, like, really, a church of 25,000 doesn't have leaders to put in places.
It's
like,
real sometimes.
We all struggle with
Yes.
that. You know, we all want more leaders. We wish we had more staff and team. Well, I texted you guys literally a couple days ago. I'm like, I'm going to be in. Let's do this. So I want to respect your time and let you get back to all the things that you're doing in your world. But the last question that I feel like every church that has multi-campus struggles with this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And you're probably like, oh, okay, how do you manage the central versus campus dynamic of like, who's in charge?
Yeah, what dynamic?
Yeah,
man? There's no dynamic.
and I'm sure anyone that has this can articulate it, but just to add context to it, it's okay. In this situation, we put out this plan. But you just mentioned you have diverse campuses, you have different locations, different demographics, different geographics. Well, that event's not going to work for us, or that that Easter plan is not going to happen, or well, we have a parking lot issue, or well, our staff doesn't work during that time because our community outreach is at that thing. How have you managed some of those things where sometimes you have to, again, it sounds bad. Sometimes you have to put your fist down and just say, no, you're doing this. And then other times you have to contextualize and manage the team's efforts.
Sure.
Has it become easier for you, or
I'll let David go first.
Has it become easier? No, it hasn't become easier. But I think I'm learning some things that are helping with the tension. Andy Stanley's famous for saying there are certain, problems to be solved or tensions to be managed. And I think Central Campus is a tension to be managed, not a problem to be solved. And so in this great tension, there actually can be a lot of strength. And so two things come to mind. The first thing is we talk a lot about first team thinking at Christ Fellowship. And so it's easy to think my campus or my department or my team. And we've really worked hard to build a culture of we are one team. We are Team Christ Fellowship. The Yankees, unfortunately, weren't able to beat the Dodgers in the World Series. But there's some things I love about the Yankees. One, the only name on the jersey is on the front, and it says New York. There's no player's name on the back. And there are some sacrifices that you make to be a part of the Yankees as well. You got to shave. You might be able to have a mustache. You got to trim your hair. There's certain things.
You got fans in the crowd that'll take balls out of gloves too.
Bro, iconic moment. We're gonna put a statue there. I forget the guy's name, but there's sacrifices for that. But that's one team.
Yeah.
and made up of positional players, but it's one team. And the same's true in multi-site. We've got to make sure that campuses aren't competing against one another, but are actually collaborating together. And that at the end of the day, Team Christ Fellowship wins. And how do we do that? And culture is a big part of that, right? Because culture means that we're all for one. We have this unity centered on Jesus and on the mission and vision of our senior pastors. And so the culture is a part of that. But I think the other big piece that is in all of that is that understanding everybody's role. What is Central's role and what is the campus's role? Central for us in our context is they are going to come up and design the ministry philosophy, and they're going to help make decisions of what that is going to look like. But the execution and implementation is on the campus. And of course, that's going to look and feel appropriate for that campus. And Greg mentioned, we've got, all these different locations across 4 counties. It's going to be very different of what church looks like in Okeechobee, Florida, than in Boynton Beach or Boca. Yeah. But Central is going to design that philosophy, what needs to happen in there, and campuses execute. And with the understanding of roles, then it is this collaboration and communication that needs to come into play. And I think that's the biggest thing. And so one of the things I love is when our central directors step into our campus pastors meetings, and they're going to talk about what's happening in the ministry. Campus pastors aren't learning about philosophical changes in student ministries from their student pastor. Yeah. They're hearing it from their student director first. Yeah. And so those meetings are important. And then we have a once a month meeting. It's about once a month called Campus Pastors and Central Directors meeting. We're all together in the same room. We're all hearing things virtually at the same time for the first time, working together. And when our hearts are aligned, then we can come to that staff member. Yeah. I think the toughest thing, and then Greg, you can share, is when a staff member doesn't know, man, my central director is telling me to do this, and my campus pastor is telling me to do this. Who wins? What am I supposed to do? Well, when that tension comes, it needs to come in conversation. And we would say at Christ Fellowship that it's going to happen at the campus level, that you're going to go to your campus pastor. You're going to say, hey, my central director is informing me of this. I feel this. And that together there'll be a conversation. And it might include getting the central director in the room, or it might be enough to be handled there directly with that. But if you can collaborate, communicate as much as possible, it's huge.
Yeah, and I think it's both. Like we always say, like Dave said, tension's good. Like if you think about Pastor Julie, sometimes she'll take I remember walking her in a meeting once that it was kind of a tension. We used to call it core in campus, so we just changed it to central, and we're like, it'll go away. The problem's fine. No, she came in, I remember she brought a road, man, and she talked about, like, she just stretched it out. And like stretch to the point, like it didn't break. But like, when you stretch one out and you let go of it, it's actually like, and now it's bigger. So it's this idea of like tension can cause, like, this is not a bad thing. Like if we pull too hard, it'll break. But like actually like pulling on it is not, everybody stretches a little bit. Like it's good to stretch a muscle. Like you don't want your muscles tense. So I think there is that. It's like, how do you find the growth inside of that? And I think the other side of like, so me, I've sat in a central seat very long. I've been in a campus seat. So I do think a huge part of it is like, we continually try to put central people in place who understand what it's like to be at a campus. Like Dave was at a campus. So when he came here to broadcast even first, it's a different expression. But then even move central, he knows the frustration it can be. Because I do think for me, I'm always coaching central team of like, hey, you got to understand one size doesn't fit all. Like you got to understand that you can't. I think about like reopening after COVID for us. It was like, we were literally in 2 different worlds from our furthest south campus. So it's like most churches want to be like, hey, on this date, we're opening and we're done. It was like, no, like guys, we as Central have to actually step down and be like, hey, we have to look, this region's different, this region, how do we stagger it? Instead of just these easy ones, we're not McDonald's, we're campus, like, hey, everyone do this, you know what I mean? So I do think from a Central perspective, and that's where I push a lot of our team is like, hey, like get down to the ground level and ask questions. Like, and that's my big thing of like, seek to understand why they're not happy with, maybe, hey, I'm getting pushed back because I tried this new philosophy. Well, then ask. Like, did you ask them ahead of time? So I think for me, it is that collaboration of like truly trying to understand each other and understanding that we have gotten too big. Maybe when we started 3 campuses, 15 miles apart, different story. Like one thing should pretty much work for everything, but we can't anymore. So I think it's that understanding of how do we really seek to understand the campuses we're helping support. And try to do our best to be in relationship. You know what I mean? And I've always told everyone in my team, like, hey, you get a call from someone on your campus, like you pick up. Chick-fil-A had this great thing of like, hey, no matter who you are on our executive team, owner-operator calls, you walk out of the meeting and take the phone call. And it's like that. I tell our central team, same way. You get a campus pastor, get on the phone, like your job is to support them. Like at the end of the day, they're doing ministry. You need to support. And I think for me, if Central keeps that benefit of like, man, even, I'm getting to set philosophy and ministry strategy, but if I keep my mind of like, I'm here to serve the campus, it keeps you humble enough that you're not trying to be, well, I said it and that's what we have to do. There's going to be times when you got to go. You're right. There's going to be times we've had to say, I hear you, we're doing it. You know what I mean? Sorry. But I think it is that health that you find in it.
Totally. And I think the two things that I felt strongest about, like in learning and that, like you said, we'll mention, hey, nobody gets saved at Central.
Yeah.
I mean, technically that's not true. Like somebody has come and gotten saved in the building.
Yeah. That's really good.
But
I'm stealing that line.
But I do think that is part of it. But then on the flip side of it, the thing you said that's key that I think we're dealing with right now, I think it was Phil Klein that I heard say this the first time. I don't know if he came up with it or if he just repeated it, but uncommunicated expectations or predetermined resentment.
That's good.
Right?
That's really
and
good.
So for me, I think one of the takeaways that I have is we need to clarify to that young staff member, let's say the youth pastor, that if you get in that decision-making point, here is your protocol. Because I think a lot of people feel like, oh, I'm just supposed to, agree with my campus pastor, or I'm supposed to. Usually, they'll probably pick the person that they have the best relationship with.
Totally, sure. Or the job they want to do.
Right. Yeah. Or the idea they agree on. Versus,
Yeah.
hey, when you are given a directive, not, what place we should go to lunch, but something that's significant, your responsibility is to go to this person to bring in that together. Because without it, then we're going to have campuses that have their own style and they're not Christ Fellowship anymore. They're not River Valley anymore. Or we're going to have people that are resentful towards each other. And that's unhealthy as well. And so I think that, again, I'm not literally taking notes, but thankfully I have a podcast to go back and listen to. But I've taken more of your time than you owe me, and I appreciate that.
Great.
And you've been a blessing to all those who are listening. But Greg, Dave, I just appreciate you guys a ton. And I know this, again, I'm going to go back and listen to this and bring this to our team. And I love that while we were down in Florida, I mean, we're here for podcasts. So we're doing a couple different podcasts here. So thank you for being one of those, and hope to be down here again soon.
Awesome. Anytime. Thank you, Logan.